And y'all been watching that on television? That is unbelievable. That whole state just burned up. And of course the finger pointing is rampant right now. You should have done this, should have done that. I don't know. Shoulda, woulda. Who's at fault? Does anybody have to be at fault? I guess so.
Well, you know, it happens every year.
Yeah.
So you'd think
ain't
if
like
they
a
were going to dump
new-
water, they'd start before the fire starts
Yeah.
and get everything wet.
And the biggest pond they got was dry. Nothing in it. I don't know what they were doing.
They said the other day that big planes are getting it out of the ocean now.
Wouldn't that be a little salty?
Well, probably
It's
would.
still wet.
It's still wet.
You wouldn't want it on your garden. It'd do terrible
Well,
things
I'd
to
rather
your
fill my
okra.
garden
Well,
than
my
burn up my
house.
house.
I want good okra, or I want my house to be still standing. I don't know. Burned okra. I want it boiled. Well, maybe boiled okra's not bad. Donnie doesn't want to vote on that one either.
I know fried okra, but not boiled.
Well, I don't care. You just bring it on. I like it any way you do it. Well, let's have that prayer.
Father, we come to you at this time. Give thanks for the opportunity to worship you and study your word. We ask you to be with us as we study and let our learning go to our hearts, our minds, and life. We ask a special prayer, Father, at this time for those in California who are being affected by this wildfires. We ask, Father, you give them some relief, help those who are fighting the fires. Change the weather, if you would, please, and give them some help controlling this. Many lives are being lost. And it's devastating a lot of people. We ask you to be with them, comfort them, encourage them, and strengthen them. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Mike, thank you for that.
Can't see you on TV.
I don't know what he's doing.
The video can't pick you up.
You need to sit back here with me.
Ask Donna to move.
See, I would nowhere near have the guts to do that. She gonna go back there and sit next to Darlene. Hey, we've kind of recounted things last week and the week before that, really, but what was one of the big references in 2 Corinthians, and it's also in 1 Corinthians, we'll talk about that in a second, that Paul is responding to. And I didn't ask that question very well, Donnie, but has anybody in here ever had to do a reference letter for somebody? What do you think, Wayne? You've done them, hadn't you? Yeah. What do you put in a reference letter?
The truth.
The truth? They'll find out if you don't. This is Wayne. He is adequate. No, you want to get better than that, don't you? Huh?
You turn them down if you don't want to do it. Turn them down if you don't want to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, when you get through, when they get through reading it, you'll think Wayne has a big S on his shirt. No, a reference letter for something like that is generally for a job. Somebody's trying to get a job, right? And you want to know that they're capable folks. that they can do the work. If somebody doesn't know you, and that's generally why you write one, and we covered this last week, I know that, but they need to understand that you're qualified. Little things like your character is important. That's what you're trying to portray in a reference letter. Like we were kind of joking with Wayne when we said he is adequate. You want to be more than adequate. You want to be a superstar. You want to get this job. So you want to have traits that make you head and shoulders above the competition. Let's just put it straight. That's what it is. You're competing with other people for that. So these letters, there's different ways to do that now, today, but they were really a necessity in the ancient world. I'm talking about the time when Paul was running around trying to convince people of things and prove to people that he is genuine and the real deal. So people today travel a lot, don't they? Like that one back there. So my favorite cruise that I've been wanting to take for like 30 years is going through the canal. I want to see how all that works. And I hadn't been able to do it yet. One of these days I'm going to get to go, Lord willing. So she found out about that. She went and did it before I could do it. I'm mad at her. Can you tell? We don't think of it much, but back then, not many people travel for pleasure. They traveled when they had to go someplace, but except the very rich. If you had a lot of money, you might get on a caravan of some kind or a boat and do that. When people travel around for work, and they did that for every once in a while, but they needed to introduce themselves to the people they were going to work for, or the people they were going to associate with. Didache. I've been trying to figure out how to pronounce that word. But the teaching of the 12 apostles, the practice of writing letters of recommendation, was a way of making sure that people who showed up out of the blue claiming to be servants you could write a letter on behalf of yourself and pretend it was from somebody else. All kind of shenanigans went on back then, Brian. And it still does today, don't it? People say anything, just say anything. The Corinthians got letters, the first Corinthians 1, from Paul, did they not? Well, what did they think about it? Well, some of them believed it, and some of them didn't. They thought, yeah, this guy just writing stuff and blowing smoke, and it's not right, and he's making himself out to be somebody he's not. But Paul does not believe, now this is something y'all can take issue with if you want to. Paul does not believe that he, as a founding apostle of the Corinthians congregation, should be expected to show such a letter to them. Could Paul be that uppity? He was. He didn't want to show a credential letter. He didn't think he needed to. Huh?
He stated that they were his epistle. They themselves knew him better than anybody.
Yeah.
And he didn't need to introduce himself again because they're the reason that he came in the first place to preach to them, and they're disciples of Paul like they were of Christ. So they knew him already.
His work should have spoke for itself.
Do what?
His work should speak for itself.
Yeah, and it did.
And the fruits of his labor should speak for itself. I've been reading a little bit of the book I got for Christmas from my sister. Anyway, this kind of reminds me of that. If you're an actor and you're trying out for a part, they have a reading. Okay, they have they give you a piece of the script or whatever, and you read that piece of the script. Unless you're somebody. And then you don't even have to read. If they want you for that part, your previous work has spoken for itself, and you don't have to try out for that particular thing. And so that's what this kind of reminded me of. His previous work was his qualification,
What's his previous work?
the establishment of the Church of Corinth.
Okay. So I'll ask some questions that some will know the answer to, some won't. Rick, how long was he there the first time? We're talking about 1 Corinthians, the book.
2 years,
Well, a year and a half.
year and a half.
Yeah, somewhere between that answer. He was there for a long time. It wasn't like he just dropped by and spent 3 or 4 days. He was there for a year and a half. And while we're on the subject, was he a big burden to those that he went to stay with? Paul. We're talking about Paul.
He paid his own way.
He paid his own way. How'd he do that?
Making things work.
Did make it.
Making what?
Tents.
He worked.
Work.
Yeah. There was a certain, just happened to be a certain type of sheep that they raised around Corinth that was real good for making tents. I guess it's waterproof, and I don't know. But that's what he did, and he wasn't a burden to those around him. And now, y'all are getting stuff that isn't in the book. This is the extra stuff, but
I'm wondering why anybody would ask for a letter from him to begin with. If they knew him, were not the original members still there?
now in 2 Corinthians, a year and a half had gone by, and the answer is likely yes. They're still there.
Testified to who he was.
So the question is, to whom would he have shown such a letter? Huh? Who gets to read it? Who gets to read that first letter? On his founding visit, the first time he went there, I'm Paul and I'm an apostle. And I'm here to help y'all get established as a congregation of the true church. So, no congregation existed that was worthy of that. So, surely the mushrooming, this is not my word, but the mushrooming of the Corinthian congregation and its vitality now are more than enough commendation of the authentic credentials, as Paul will indeed need letters. He doesn't need letters. Y'all are my letter. Look at you. We got deacons. We got all the people here to lead the church, and you're doing good.
From what I got from reading it was there's a lot of people saying they were apostles that weren't,
Oh,
and they were downgrading Paul's work, saying this is what's really supposed to be happening.
yeah.
And I think the people of Corinth was being taken in by those folks.
Pretty bad about it, is what they were. There's a, John will know what the word is, but they're called super apostles in a lot of the books that you read accompanying this work. But anyway, according to most writers, Paul didn't need these letters. So let's go, somebody read 1 Corinthians 4, verse 6. I think we read it last week, but we read it one more time as a refresher. First Corinthians 4, verse 6. You got it, Mark?
Yeah. For it is the God who commanded light to shine out of darkness, who has shown in our hearts to give the light of knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ.
So we've got a baseline testimony of the authenticity of that. So there is another group. Run over to 2 Corinthians 1:17. I'm not trying to confuse us, but this gets complicated, Donnie, and I can't help it. It just does. 2 Corinthians, what did I say, 1:17.
Let me read.
Yeah.
Therefore, when I was planning this, did I do it lightly? Or the things I plan, do I plan according to the flesh? That is, with me there is no, that with me there should be yes, yes, and no, no.
So, and we can get into that, but people that have been to Corinth between visits have left Paul a mess. Paul has a mess to clean up, and that's what he's talking about here. Paul indeed would neither need letters nor, since his travels to pioneer churches or back to churches he's already planted. Or testimony. The people he went to see, the fact that they have credentials, the fact that they're doing good, the fact that they're spreading the gospel, that's his credentials. Does that make sense at all? He's doing good. The gospel's being spread, and y'all are doing it, and it's because I taught you. That's my credentials. That's why I don't need a letter. Comments about that? Yes, Brian.
One thing that would have made him more authentic is that he was willing to work with his own hands.
Yeah.
Instead of living off the church,
Yeah.
because it meant that much to him, that even though he probably had the right to live off his preaching, he didn't want people to falsely accuse him.
There is another element, like I said to Donnie, that this whole thing is complicated, and we're not gonna, don't worry, but we could study this for a long time. Who came in to Corinth and started messing with their heads and started asking for things that aren't really right and started redirecting what Paul had already taught them? There's a word for it. Judaizing teachers. What are they about?
Well, they try to make them still follow the circumcision and the things that are part of Jewish religion.
Why is that a bad thing? The answer's obvious, but let's do it anyway,
Christ is not involved in there.
because Christ wasn't involved. We're trying to explain a brand new gospel. A brand new gospel means what, Amy? Good news. This is the good news. We're not under the old law anymore. We're able to explain this away with a new way of thinking, a new way of doing things.
The key is in 2 Corinthians 4:7.
Yeah.
We walk by faith and not by sight. They were used to doing everything just for show or for commandment and not by faith.
All right. And it's believed that the troublemakers were Judaizers, like Donna said, who were set in their ways and old laws and customs and didn't want to change. And we're proud of y'all at Corinth, but not really. We want you to go back to studying the old ways of Judaizing teachers. They would have carried letters. Where would these letters have come from? I'm getting way too tedious here. Sanhedrin. That's a great answer, because that's exactly right. But if they would have come from synagogues that they carried letters from certain synagogues affirming their status.
Same synagogue that Paul came from.
Yeah. So was Paul? Did he have credentials from the synagogue?
Used to.
He used to.
Huh?
He used to.
Well, they didn't like dissolve.
He still had the knowledge.
He had memorized the whole Bible. Paul was a scholar in the old Bible. He could recite the thing. So we forget that sometimes. All right, I'm going to skip over some things. Christianity marks a fundamentally new way which God does business with people. And this can be seen not only in Paul's heart and in the hearts of the Corinthians, but also in the heart and very life of every believer impacted by God's Spirit. In my mind, it's moving from thou shalt not to thou shalt not steal is a concept. But what if you move to I don't want to steal? The Judaizing method of teaching this, it feels so wrong. I don't want to have other gods before me. I've done that, and I'm not satisfied by it. I want to make an idol out of I don't want to make an idol out of anything. It leaves me feeling empty. That's the Judaizing way. Had some logic to it, but the new way of the Christian way, I don't want to use God's name in vain. It makes me very uncomfortable to hear any variation of the term God and the way it's used in church. It's just wrong. It's an inherent understanding of what God wants us to do. It makes me very uncomfortable. Like I said, I don't want to violate Sabbath principles. I enjoy resting in the Lord and finding rest in His people. I don't want to dishonor my parents. It's not fun always fighting with them. I want to honor them despite all their deep flaws. And honestly, I've realized that they're so set in their ways that it's not really worth the fight. So I may as well choose the honor route. You could go on and on with this, but I don't want to murder, even though it might get me the end that I'm after right now. But the Christian way of thinking this through is I don't want to murder. I want to love others like Christ does. Christ taught me, showed me how I'm better off if I learn to love them, love people. You get the idea, right? Moving from thou shalt not to I want to do the right thing. Is that the basis of the Christian movement? Can you rationalize that in your head? No. Yes, Brian.
Well, I think it's kind of related to the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law.
Exactly. Yeah.
If one is out of fear, one is out of love.
This is profoundly more important than any human originated letter of recommendation from any congregation. It's certainly more significant toward identifying a true minister of the gospel, despite the urgings of this group of transient Christian leaders currently at Corinth. So Corinth was kind of a mess right now. You know what we ought to talk about, just test y'all's understanding of it. There's two books written about the Corinthian church. 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians. Why was the 1 Corinthian letter written? We're testing your knowledge now.
They wrote not for to deal with some issues they had.
Say that again, Mike.
They wrote to Paul and asked him to come and or deal with the problems they had.
What problems?
Starting verses chapter 1, division. Chapter 3, division. Chapter 5, you've got incest, you've got lawsuits. And he makes a statement in 2 Corinthians 3. He said, I do not want to make another painful visit. In other words, what he told them there pained them and pained him.
And it took him a while to do it. How long did we say he was there? Year and a half. Took a long time to get that message across. That's what he was doing for a year and a half. What's the shortcut word for the first book? The painful visit? I've heard it referred to as that. Paul's confidence in the adequacy of his calling as a minister and an apostle to Corinth does not come from himself. Rather, the confidence he has in mind refers back to the Corinthians themselves as the letter on his heart, which itself depends really on their own confidence in displaying themselves as an open letter to all to see. Paul, let me get to another piece of notes that's easier to read. As soon as I find it, Mark, here it is. Now, these are Darlene's notes. Can you tell? If you really want to study Corinth, how did the church form? What were the moves that happened back and forth? We're talking about Acts 18. That's where the Church of Christ at Corinth gets planted. 1 Corinthians is a letter to correct, like Mike just said, problems that Paul had heard about. A lot of folks rebelled against Paul's authority, and we see that depicted in 1 Corinthians. Who are you, Paul? Are you real? Are you really an apostle? Or are you just faking it? A lot of folks rebelled against Paul's authority. After writing 1 Corinthians letter, Paul visited And it's called by a lot the painful visit. Because he went to Corinth to correct a bunch of problems. That's not something that most folks find enjoyable. You know, if I'm here to correct a bunch of problems and straighten you out, Brian. No one looks forward to that, do they? I've got to go in here and go to work with a switch and straighten you all out. And that's what he was doing. So Paul says, I still love you, even though I've had to write some terrible things and correct you and tell you to straighten up and like that. Why did they reject Paul? Did anybody remember? We're getting deep now. Why did they reject Paul?
Past life.
Yeah. Yeah. Why wouldn't? What did Paul's past reputation indicate? What was Paul like?
Persecuted Christians.
Huh?
He persecuted Christians.
Super zealous. We talk about the T-shirt with a thing on it. What he did was he found out that people were doing certain things, spreading this Christianity stuff, and he'd go shut it down. He would go, and what was the worst thing he did? He put them in jail. He had a bunch of them killed. Paul was a stinker.
Did he play a part in Stephen getting stoned?
Yeah. Yeah. Did he play a part in Stephen getting stoned? Was the question.
Held the coats.
What did he do? He held their coats?
While they did it.
Wow. I mean, I didn't do anything wrong. I just held their coat. I think he did something wrong. His attitude was... All right, we've already talked about what Paul did. Another little detail that we don't talk about very often, but he wasn't a very impressive public speaker, apparently. And we glean that from over in Acts in a place or two. But when Paul stood up to talk, it wasn't like, ooh, boy, he's good. No, he wasn't that good. We revere people. Well, Mike can deliver a sermon and make you remember it. But Paul wasn't like that. You couldn't. He was not an impressive public speaker. Other Corinthians leaders were more impressive than Paul. It wasn't, was it good or bad that these early Christians didn't accept Paul, and why?
Good.
Wasn't good.
Because I'm able to read it and live my life according to it.
If you could follow it. He is an apostle. He had divine inspiration. So, contrary to what others think, it's not about status or self-motivation. What was Paul? He'd land in a community and he'd figure out a vocation that he could do that was productive and make his own living. Unheard of. Unheard of. Contrary to what others think, it's not about status or self-promotion. Look at me. I want the accolades. I want to be this super preacher.
Bob, over in 4, he even talks about how the apostles are condemned to death. That we are the ones that are blessed because we have homes, we have families. And he says, we are all condemned to death, so you are the ones that are blessed.
Yeah.
Not me, or Paul, not me, Paul. So he's looking at himself as, I'm doing this and I know I'm going to my death.
Yeah.
So he's not bragging.
Even when he was killing
Yeah. He wouldn't have done it if he thought it was self-promoting. You know, you see a lot of these TV preachers. I planned on getting a lot farther than that. But anyway, you see a lot of the TV preachers self-promoting themselves, got these grand old buildings and stuff. What do you think Paul would have done if he'd marched him into one of these cathedrals that's being built now? Huh? He just said, "Nah, I don't want any part of this. This isn't Christianity." Contrary to what others think, it's not about status or self-promotion. Paul depicts himself as a slave to King Jesus. That's who I'm a slave to. It may seem odd, but it makes sense. Paul's job is to point people to Jesus, the one who is impressive. Paul may not be that impressive. He may not be able to be a good public speaker. He may be like me and stumble around but Paul's job is to point people to Jesus, the one who is impressive. They want letters of recommendation, but this is ridiculous to Paul because they are his letter. Look at what you guys have turned into in the 2 or 3 short years since we started the Corinthian church. Look at you. You ought to be proud of that. They want letters of recommendation, but this is ridiculous because they are his letter. Paul compares Old Covenant between God and Israel, mediated by Moses, to the New Covenant. What was it like in the Old Covenant when you talk, just generally speaking, when you talk about Moses, what was he like when he came down from Mount Sinai with the tablets? That's not even a fair question. Why? You couldn't even look at him. He was shining. He was shining. Paul compares the Old Covenant between God and Israel, mediated by Moses, to the New Covenant. And that comparison is between God and the Corinthians. Can you compare that? I think you can. And you can make a lot of sense out of it. So that's mediated by Jesus. Yeah. All right, we've been all over the map today, and I'm sorry about that. But John, you want to pick it up next week? We'll go into chapter 4 if you want to pre-read some of that. It's just as complicated as 3 was. But thank you for listening, and we'll be back to take the helm in a week or 2.
Read that tiny little typing.
It's hard. I have to put on my cheater glasses.
Darlene, you need to start putting it in big letters.
Big, 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 huge letters. Yeah, it's a mess. Here, I'll sort it out when I get home.